Hello, I'm Sarah, this is Hardcover Hearts, and this is the video I've been promising for a little while, but true to form, for the past 3 years, I haven't been able to do this until February. And voila, here I am again, year 3. This is my favorites in different categories. I do this for a few different reasons. Number one, I read a tremendous amount of books in the year, and I read a lot of different styles of books or genres. And I do think it's important to highlight the best books in those areas, because I don't know how I would cross-reference them or put a mystery book against a memoir as an example. So I've broken these into kind of categories, and I have not stacked ranked them. What I've done is I've gone through my list on both Storygraph and Goodreads, and I've just really looked at the books, and I've thought about them and the books that made me sigh or made me laugh or brought a smile to my face or made me clutch my heart. These are the books that I've pulled out as having had special significance last year. I don't have these in any order except for kind of groupings. So this is the first of 2 videos, like I did again the last few years, where the first video is going to be literary fiction, translated fiction, and that'll be what this is fundamentally. The other one is going to be memoirs, biographies, and essays, as well as backlisted and classics, then mysteries and crime fiction. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into them. So the very first one, I don't have a copy, but I do want to get a copy of this. This book is Bass Rock by Evie Wyld. This book terrified me, but in a very interesting way. I don't like horror. I don't like to be scared. But I felt that the use of violence against women anchored in this one place, told through 3 different timelines, was incredibly, incredibly effective. And it still makes me question. It still makes me think of things. It had a powerful mark on me, and I hope more people read it. Then, speaking of powerful reads, visceral reading of this book. Dee Dee from Brown Girl Reading and Read Soul Lit, she advocates this book like nobody's business, and she was so right. If you do not follow her, please do, either on Read Soul Lit or Brown Girl Reading, but she's phenomenal. You can tell you're in good hands with this author. It has scope. It has humanity. It has a historical lens at a few key people and how their lives intertwine at the time during World War II. This is a story about race. It is a story about America. It's a story of redemption and fight. This book really was powerful. I felt it. It was visceral. It was heartwarming. It was compassionate, and it was caring. This book had everything, and I hope more people seek it out, because it was really that good. The next one is another book that I do not have a copy of, but I want to get one. And this is Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters. I was really sad that this didn't make it further in the Women's Prize. This is a debut novel, and it is the story of a chaotic breakup and regrouping and coming to terms of 2 trans characters. One has detransitioned. So they were a couple, and then one of the people decided that they did not want to live a trans life anymore and detransitioned. Gets involved with a new person at their work, their boss, and that woman becomes pregnant, to which all sorts of chaos then ensues. I love a book that really pushes at the boundaries and creates that kinetic energy. That a lot of that was here. And I also love a book that doesn't pander, that expects you to meet them a little bit and do a little bit of work. And the same thing was true for this book. I felt that Torrey Peters did a phenomenal job at opening the door to a lot of life in the trans community and a lot of the challenges and difficulties. And this was just an eye-opening, very interesting book. I still think about it, and yeah, I wish it had gotten further, but was so happy that it was actually on the long list last year. Another book from that list, Burnt Sugar. This is by Avni Doshi. This book is about rage. A young woman is having to take care of her mother now that her mother is in decline. And there are so many issues that they have yet to deal with. And her upbringing was absolute pandemonium. Speaking of chaos, I did say I like a little bit of chaos in my books. And the woman is dealing with her new life as a new wife, and then having to take care of her mother, and her new husband does not understand what he's dealing with, and she does. Number one, the cover is just, love the cover, but what is inside was so raw and visceral. That you'll hear me say things like that for many of the books this year. It felt, when life was kind of languishing, getting to read something that really pumped the blood back into my veins felt great, even if it was painful, even if it was frustrating, even if it was filled with rage. I thought this was fantastic. Now, a quieter book that I think also did tremendous. This is Natasha Brown's Assembly. Look at that cover. I just got this in from the UK. This is a signed edition because I just enjoyed it so much. This is very smartly constructed. We meet a woman, she's a Black woman living in London who is very successful at her job. But she has to work so much harder than everyone else. She has to deal with microaggressions. She has to deal with asterisks and suspicion at every turn. But she has done tremendously well for herself because she has built her life in the way she wanted. She has plans to go away for the weekend to her boyfriend's family's estate. So her boyfriend's family is very, very wealthy, members of the peerage, and they're going to have one of those fancy weekend parties at their home. And she's avoided going for a long time, but now she's going to go. And she gets a piece of news that starts to chip away at her thoughts of who she wants to be and what her future could be or should be. It's tiny. It is so, but it is packed. Also a debut. A lot of debuts this year. And just, I look forward so much to reading more from Natasha Brown. Then this was such a strange wild card. This is Everyone Knows Your Mother is a Witch by Rivka Galchen. This book made me laugh out loud. How do I explain this book? So this book was set in Germany during the witch trials, and It is like transcripts from the trials, and we have it's so funny. It's like a modern age sensibility about gossip and kind of a Real Housewives-y vibe to it, set in the past, with all the superstition and nonsense and things that we see very clearly as untrue, in terms of things that people were afraid of. It was so humorous and so funny. Our main character is smart, but kind of no nonsense type of person, which gets her in trouble every single day. And the characters in this little town and all of the alliances that start to happen, this just was great fun. It made me laugh. The audiobook was phenomenal. And if you need something different and something a little light, but also interesting from a historical perspective, this might be the one for you. Okay, so that was my literary fiction pile. I'm going to move into translated fiction. So the first one from this list is something that I still think about frequently, and had a little bit of that chaotic, frenetic energy that Detransition baby had. And this is Slum Virgin. This was by Gabriela, Cabezón, Cámara, and translated by Francis Riddle. This book was wild. We have two storylines, two main narrators, and they recount the story of their meeting. One was a reporter who actually went to interview the other. The other person was a trans kind of street figure, like hero in this community, in this slum in Buenos Aires. And like a larger-than-life character, and all of the things that they were able to create and bring forward for the people in the community living in this slum. It's a wild ride. It is a wild ride of a book, and it pumped so much energy into my veins. I still think about it, and it definitely has piqued an interest for me in South American literature. Something that was so painful but so exquisitely written. This is Difficult Light by Tomas Gonzalez, and this was translated from the Spanish by Andrea Rosenberg. Beautiful little archipelago book. They do really lovely little interesting sized editions. This is a meditation of grief. We've got a painter who is losing his eyesight in his older age, and who is reflecting on his life and the loves in his life, including tremendous amount of grief. This book just tugged at my heart, but also the beautiful quality of the writing and the characters that he was able to create in such a small little slim volume. And I also loved that this spans place. So this takes place in a few different locations, and you really got a sense for the life that this man has led. I thought it was absolutely tremendous. I think if there's maybe one book that has made me think differently this year, it's this next one. Oh, this is Minor Detail by Adania Shibli, and it was translated by Elizabeth Jacquette. This book is also tiny, so powerful. We have two timelines, two narrators. This is in Palestinian land, and the place is very important in this book. This book is so exquisitely crafted. It's so thoughtful. It is painful, and it's painful because of the violence, the disdain, the facts, the situation. I still think about this book. I will reread this book. I specifically want to reread it because there's some overlapping that happens, kind of like a collage, like laying over one thing over the other. And it loops the first story into the second in ways that I think I missed when I first read it. It's incredibly powerful. It's painful, but more intellectually interesting than painful in the same way that a difficult light was. This is challenging. It will intellectually challenge you and make you question a lot. Fantastic book. This next one, also cannot stop thinking of it. I mentioned that Slum Virgin made me look for more Southern American women writers. Well, here is one that I actively sought after because of what it was about. This is Elena Knows by Claudia Piñeiro, and this is also translated by Frances Riddle, the same translator. Okay, gorgeous, gorgeous cover. In this book, we have a mother whose daughter was found dead, and she's convinced that her daughter did not kill herself like the police said she did. She has almost exhausted all of her options to find out what happened, save one. There is one person that she needs to get to talk to, and she's lost touch with them, but she knows where they live. She is going to visit them, but our main character is an old woman with Parkinson's. And the actual things that she has to go through just to cross the city, and the way she has to time it with her medicines, and the fear of getting locked into her body at any of those moments is palpable and real. But she's determined, and it makes for such a compelling read. I just have never thought of illness, specifically Parkinson's, but any other illness in the way that I have thought of after this book. So I'm changed after reading this. Phenomenal, phenomenal book. Something a little milder, but still emotionally packed a punch. This was At the End of the Matinee by Keiichiro Hirano. And this was translated by Juliet Winters Carpenter. Just gorgeous, gorgeous cover. This is a love story between a guitarist, a famous Japanese guitarist, classical guitarist, and a woman who is a reporter, a Japanese woman who is a reporter in Iraq. And they, as adults, have a very complex, very challenging and very interesting love affair with all sorts of repercussions for both of them. It was, I loved it. I loved it. I loved the slow burn. I loved an adult, realistic, thoughtful romance that spoke to needs of complex characters. It was so good. Then the next thing I read this with Natalie of A Curious Reader, and I think this was on her favorite list as well. And oh, I just love this book so much. Abigail by Magda Szabo. This is translated by Len Ricks. Oh, this book is so good, so good. And if you can read it with someone, oh, do that, do that. This is the story of a young girl in Hungary. Her father is a general. Her mother has passed away, and he needs to make sure that she's taken care of, and it's time for her to go to school. So he sends her to this very proper, very isolated school, private school. And she has to kind of get in there and hold her own and meet all of these people and learn. It's a coming of age, but there's also so many political implications of what's going on in Hungary and how that impacts her and her friends. The story of the friendships between the girls in this boarding school was so wonderful. It wasn't easy, but it also wasn't typical. I've read many boarding school stories, and this is one of the best. I deeply love this character. I think Magda Szabo does amazing work. Next to the Door, this is my second favorite of hers. I only have one more to read with Natalie soon, but I just hope it could live up to Abigail, because this was a tremendous, tremendous read. Next up, everyone said this was a great book, and I found a copy. These are really hard to find, so if you do find this in a used bookstore, grab them. The covers are always very odd, so I don't have a matching set. This is Cora Sandel's Alberta and Jacob, and this is translated by Elizabeth Roken. We have a young girl, Alberta, and her brother Jacob, and they live in this little town. The father is kind of a main important person in this town, but their family life is a mess. There's a lot of coldness in the air. There's a lot of coldness in her home. There's a lot of coldness where they live, and she really is just seeking warmth. She's seeking friendship and love and kindness, but she's also incredibly shy and introverted and likes to be by herself, but at the same time cannot wait to escape the confines of this small town, the small home, the claustrophobic environment. And she lives a lot through her brother, who is someone who gets away with more things than she is ever able to. And the story of the environment, it will make you cold. It will literally make you shiver as you read this, because it's so atmospheric. You feel the air. You hear the ice breaking as you're walking on the cobblestones. It's such a great book. I really, really enjoyed this. This is a trio. This is the first. I did read the second, enjoyed it, but I'm waiting to read the third this year, hopefully sometime soon. Another book that changed me and changed how I think about aging and poverty, and specifically a book that made me physically feel something, The Lady and the Little Fox Fur by Violette Leduc, with an introduction from Deborah Levy on this one. This book is so tiny, a lot of tiny books, powerful tiny books this last year. This story is about an old woman who is literally down to her last pennies. She has sold everything in her apartment. She lives in Paris. She lives in one of those rooms at the highest point of the building. She spends her days walking the streets of Paris to stay warm. And she's isolated, she's alone, she's not recognized, she doesn't have community, and so she lives in her imagination. And her community is the places that she goes and who she observes. And she's imaginative, she's creative, but she is so old and she is so poor and she is so hungry. It made me think differently about hunger. Of course I know about hunger. There have been many times where I have been hungry in my life. Not like this. Not at this level of poverty. Was tremendous and frightening. But this book was absolutely remarkable. A book that is where I went from a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. This next book was so polar opposite, but not in any way sentimental, cloying, saccharine, or too sweet. The Summer Book. and this is by Tove Jansson. This book is remarkable. Let me see, who is it translated by? This is translated by Thomas Thiel, translated by from the Swedish. I don't know what I was expecting. You hear about a summer spent with an older grandmother and a very young child, and you think you're going to have a very sweet, very soft, tender story. And this was not that. It really wasn't. This has nature writing. It has flipping of roles, in that the grandmother is a little childish and the child wants to be independent. And it's about this family that has this little cottage, this little home on this island, and they go there in the summers. And these are little vignettes and stories about like little scenes. It's like little vignettes and scenes of this family on this little island. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil the vibe. But it's a very interesting read. It is not typical. It's not what I expected, but I loved being surprised by it. Now, this last one for translated fiction is one that I'm putting up here, even though it drove me crazy. I'm including it because I can't stop thinking about it. The characters were so vivid and so real, and probably one of the worst men I've ever read in fiction, ever. And I've read a lot of horrible men. This is Naguib Mahfouz's Palace Walk. This won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and this is translated by William Maynard Hutchins and Olive E. Kenny. This is part of a trilogy. This is the first book. And in this, we meet the main family, and the father is tyrannical. The father has an iron fist on this family, very controlling. And we have brothers, a daughter, and a very young child, a mother who does everything for her family, everything for her sons, everything for her husband. And there's an inflection point of what's happening because the English are in Egypt. There's starting to be change. There's starting to be some modernization that's being introduced, and it's fraying at the fabric of politically and culturally what's happening in this family. I look forward to reading the other two just to see what happens. But I will never forget some scenes in this book. They were that powerful, that visceral. I was that enraged. So yeah, really, really happy that I read this year. So that's a lot of books. Though that is part one. So I hope you come back and stay tuned for part two.